We are already aware of two principal determinants of money supply: high powered money and money multiplier. The money multiplier framework postulates a relationship between ordinary money supply M and high powered money H. Here M is the ordinary money supply produced by Reserve Bank of India and the government, and is held by the public in the form of currency notes and coins CC as well as demand deposits DD. While high powered money is H, which is money produced by RBI and the government and is held by the public in the form of currency notes and by the banks in the form of reserves. It is sometimes called the monetary base. It includes all cash, even vault cash at commercial banks, which are redeemable in cash. These assets are called reserves because commercial banks hold them to honor checking account withdrawals during times when withdrawals exceed new deposits. New loans are also made out of reserves in the sense that a bank with no reserves would have no funds to loan out. High powered money is important because it represents net wealth to the private sector. In contrast, checking account money, called demand deposits, represent an asset to the owner of the checking account but represent a liability from the perspective of the bank, which owes that money to a customer on demand, and therefore they are known as demand deposits. The liability cancels out with the asset, leaving a net effect of zero on the net wealth of the private sector. Commercial bank deposits at the central bank represent a liability to the central bank. The concept of high powered money is important because the central bank directly controls the high powered money and exerts only indirect control over measures of money supply, which are influenced by willingness of commercial banks to make loans and reserves.
After studying this module, we shall be able to know the proximate determinants of the money multiplier, learn about the effects of changes in each of these determinants on the money multiplier, identify the ultimate determinants of the proximate determinants, evaluate the impact of these determinants on the money supply, and analyze the behavior of the proximate and ultimate determinants of the money multiplier in India. The behavioral relation of the money supply equation is M is equal to MCRT into H, where M is equal to ordinary money and H is equal to high-powered money. C is equal to currency deposit ratio, T is term deposit ratio, and R is equal to reserve deposit ratio. Here, the currency oblique demand deposit ratio C, time deposit oblique demand deposit ratio T are representative of the non-bank public's portfolio decisions and are their behavioral ratios, while the reserve ratio R, where R is equal to RR plus E, is largely determined by the central bank through the statutory cash reserve requirement RR and residually by the commercial bank's excess reserve ratio E, where E is equal to ER upon D. Thus, R represents in part the bank's portfolio decision. The money multiplier theory thus decomposes all changes in the money supply M into two broad heads, changes in M and changes in H, but the changes in money multiplier are multi-layered.
The complex of forces affecting high-powered money H are the result of transactions of the RBI with the various sectors of the economy and the world at large in performance of its duties or its functions as the central bank. Thus, the central bank acts as a banker to the government, as a lender of last resort, or as a banker to other commercial banks and cooperative banks, and as the ultimate custodian of the country's foreign exchange reserves. In addition, it also makes funds available to the commercial sector via the various development banks.
The equation shows us that the proximate determinants of M and therefore of money supply are further affected by the ultimate determinants like several rates of interest, holdings of black money, spread of banking facilities, etc., which impinge on one or more of the asset ratios. Now, to predict the values of C, T, R, let us look at the empirical analysis of the three ratios. The empirical analysis can be conducted at two levels. A, at the macro level, where it is seen that CTR have been highly stable, implying that changes in CTR have gone in offsetting directions, giving it a long-run stability. Thus, most changes in money supply are attributed to changes in H. B. At an analytical level, the money supply equation can be used to explain the observed behavior and to predict future behavior on the basis of the observed behavior. We can also analyze the variables to be manipulated to bring about changes in money supply. Let us now analyze the effect of changes in CTR on the money multiplier. This can be calculated by differentiating the narrow money multiplier with respect to each of the three ratios CRT, yielding 1. Delta M1 upon delta C is equal to minus 1 minus R1 plus T divided by C plus R into 1 plus T whole square is less than 0 for R1 plus T is less than 1. 2. Delta M1 upon delta C is equal to minus R into 1 plus C by C plus R 1 plus T whole square is less than 0. That is, as T increases, narrow money multiplier decreases and hence narrow money also decreases. However, since M3 is equal to M1 plus TD, an increase in T would imply an increase in M3. Let us now analyze the effect of change in reserve deposit ratio on narrow multiplier. By differentiating the narrow multiplier, we get delta M1 by R equal to minus 1 plus T into 1 plus C by C plus R bracket 1 plus T whole square is less than 0. It can be seen that increases in R, T will unambiguously lower the value of M1, while increasing in C will lower M1 so long as R bracket 1 plus T is less than 1, representing the leakage of H into current C holdings or reserves. It is important to note that since the total reserve ratio R is equal to the statutory reserve ratio RR plus the excess reserve ratio E, a change in R could come about through changes in RR or E. It is possible for the impact of changes in RR to be picked up through an adjustment in H or M. If the impact of changes in RR are captured in M, it becomes behaviorally unstable. It may be better, therefore, to capture the changes in the statutory reserve ratio RR by adjusting the high-powered money H star, making it a policy manageable variable, and M star is equal to M upon H star, a behaviorally stable variable. Thus, in the adjusted H approach, the partial derivative of M with respect to R is effectively capturing the effect of changes in the excess reserves on the money multiplier. Let us now calculate the total effect on M of the expected change in each of the ratios C, R, and T. We need to estimate the partial effects of M on each of C, T, and R and add up. Differentiating M is equal to M bracket C, T, R totally, and taking discrete approximations, we get change in M equal to delta M by delta C into change C plus delta M by delta T into change T plus delta M by delta R into change R plus E, with E representing the residual consequent to taking discrete approximations. The three terms on the right-hand side represent the partial contribution to the change in M of the change in each of the ratios C, T, R. The sum of these terms constitute the explained portion of changes in M. We know the values of delta M by C, delta M by delta T, and delta M by delta R, and change in C, change in R, change in T are either observed or predicted. The relative contribution of each of the ratios to the changes in M can be found by dividing both sides of the equation by change in M to yield 1 is equal to delta M by delta C into change in C by change in M plus delta M by delta T into change in T by change in M plus delta M by delta R into change in R by change in M plus E by change in M.
Till 1997, the central government could borrow any amount from the Reserve Bank of India. The state governments had a limit on their borrowing, but often ended up with unauthorized overdrafts. These were cleared by the state governments asking for increased plan assistance at the time of the budget from the central government. The central government would use their unlimited powers to borrow from the Reserve Bank of India to ultimately clear the overdrafts. However, the situation has changed post a historic agreement reached between Reserve Bank of India and Government of India in 1997. The issue of ad hoc treasury bills by the government was discontinued and was replaced by what is called ways and means advances to the central government. There was also a limit on the amount that could be borrowed by the government from RBI through the issue of treasury bills. The central and state governments keep their deposits in an interest-free account with the Reserve Bank of India. These deposits are subtracted from the gross RBC to the government to get net RBC to the government. This is a rough figure for gross deficit financing of the government or monetization of the public debt, and is very important as a determinant of the changes in high-powered money H.
Of the three proximate determinants of the money multiplier, the ratio C upon DD occupies a pivotal position. The C upon DD ratio conveys the choice of the public between the two components of narrow money, which has important consequences for the money supply analysis. For the higher the C upon DD ratio, the greater the leakage of high-powered money, and therefore the smaller is the secondary expansion of money supply. Both C upon DD and T upon DD thus constitute leakages from the money supply process. Currency demand deposit ratio could be divided into the scale variable income, the opportunity cost variable rate of interest, and structural variables spread of banking facilities black money.
Net monetary liabilities of Reserve Bank of India. The net RBC to various sectors discussed are financed by RBI partly by creating its monetary liabilities RBM and partly by its net non-monetary liabilities NNML. The larger these non-monetary resources of RBI, the less it has to depend on the creation of new H, that is high-powered money, to finance its credit to various sectors. Hence, this factor enters the equation of factors affecting RBM with a negative sign. The net non-monetary liabilities of the Reserve Bank in this equation on the left hand side would be equal to non-monetary liabilities of the Reserve Bank minus other assets of the Reserve Bank. This is how we do the netting. The other assets of the RBI consist of premises, furniture, advances to certain scheduled commercial banks with respect to their investments abroad. The non-monetary liabilities consist of two heads. One is paid up capital of rupees 5 crores and reserves of rupees 150 crores. Thirdly, the contribution to the three national funds maintained by RBI consisting of the National Agricultural Credit Long-Term Operation Fund and the Stabilization Fund and the National Industrial Credit Fund maintained out of the annual incomes of RBI. Fourthly, the RBI Employees Pension Fund, Provident Fund and Cooperative Guarantee Fund. Fifthly, there is a balance under the Compulsory Deposit Scheme, which is CDS, and sixthly, there is a portion of India's quota subscription and some other payments which have been made to IMF, account number 17, which is profits of the RBI temporarily held.
Scale variable income. The growth of income in a growing economy is primarily associated with monetization. Monetization is associated with a variety of changes like spread of banking facilities into unbanked areas, migration from rural to urban areas, changing sectoral composition of the economy, growth in literacy, better transportation and communication network, commercial and industrial development. Income acts as a proxy for most of these developments. However, since both the demand for currency as well as the demand for demand deposits tend to increase with increases in income, a declining C upon DD ratio indicates that the income elasticity of currency demand is less than that of demand deposits. However, since both the demand for currency as well as the demand for demand deposits tend to increase with increases in income, a declining C upon DD ratio indicates that the income elasticity of currency demand is less than that of demand deposits. Structural variables. The spread of banking facilities amongst the population is likely to affect the C upon DD ratio, as it would enable the public to move out of currency into DD deposits and hence could be the cause of a decline in the C upon DD ratio. Another factor which could affect this ratio is black money holdings. In a period of high taxation, people have an incentive to evade taxes and hold them as currency. Apart from the C upon DD ratio, the T upon DD ratio is also affected by the decisions of the public. A rise in the T upon DD ratio would lower the value of the narrow money multiplier and raise that of the broad money multiplier.
The cash reserve ratio is also one of the proximate determinants of money multiplier. The higher the reserve ratio and the less are the funds that the banks have to loan out. This leads to a lower creation of money and perhaps ultimately to a higher purchasing power of the money previously in use. Speaking formally, when the ratio is revised upwards, the expression of narrow and broad multiplier M1 and M3 decrease, leading to a lower multiple expansion of bank deposits on account of enhanced reserve ratio. However, to discuss the impact of H, which is the high powered money, on money supply, we should make the money multiplier invariant to changes in CRR and to adjust H to incorporate the effect of the reserve ratio changes. This makes the money multiplier an independently determined variable as far as the monetary authorities are concerned.
We can now look at the key determinants or explanatory variables responsible for the behavior of the ratio. The choice of the public between the currency demand deposits and time deposit ratio is governed largely by considerations of liquidity, profitability in terms of higher interest income earned, and individual time preference in portfolio management. Scale variable income. Looking at real income as a scale variable, it has been observed that the income elasticity of demand for demand deposits is lower vis-à-vis demand for time deposits. Time deposits are a form of savings and not a medium of exchange. Therefore, as the level of savings increases with a rise in income, people hold more time deposits. Opportunity cost variable, interest rate. The choice of the public in favor of time deposits is bound to be governed, however, largely by interest rate considerations. This is so because time deposits as saving instruments have to compete with other financial assets whose rate of return and riskiness becomes important and is hence picked up by the rate of the interest. The interest rates, which can be treated as opportunity cost variables, are rates of return on post office savings deposits, rates of return on ordinary and preference shares, rates of return on private company deposits of various maturities, along with the rates of interest on small saving schemes. The T upon DD ratio is a decreasing function of these opportunity cost variables. Structural variables. The spread of banking facilities would have no differential impact on the T upon DD ratio, as there would be growth in both demand and time deposits. Similarly, increase in tax rates would lead to holdings of black money, which are mostly held as cash, but may even be held in the form of fixed deposits in different banks under the account of different family members to escape detection. The reserve ratio of commercial banks is the one factor which is not directly affected by the behavioral choices of the public. It is an important decision that banks make in determining their portfolio composition in an effort to strike a balance between the considerations of liquidity, profitability, and safety. The basic choice is between cash and non-cash assets or earning assets. The portfolio composition is affected by legal restrictions as well as by institutional changes. For example, nationalization, amalgamation, and liquidation of weak banks, strengthening of paid-up capital requirements of banks, deposit insurance, supervision and inspection of banks by the RBI improve their internal health and strength, while the continuous availability of funds in the call money market and the presence of RBI as a lender of last resort improves the stability of the monetary system and lessens the need of banks to keep cash reserves. The R upon D ratio is composed of two ratios, the RR upon D ratio and the ER upon D ratio. The RR upon D is due to the imposition of the statutory cash reserve requirement imposed by the monetary authorities on the banks to be kept as a proportion of their demand and time liabilities as balances with the RBI. The residual reserves or excess reserve ratio ER upon D are held either as cash in hand or as balances with the RBI. It is these reserves which the banks as a whole use to meet their currency drains as well as clearing drains. These drains on the reserves of the banks arise if there is a big enough shift in the asset preferences of the public from bank deposits to currency or due to drains of cash from one bank to other banks within the system.
The CRR is a monetary tool which is often levied as an average percentage of the demand for time and demand liabilities of a bank over a fortnight, as well as an incremental CRR which is levied on the increment to the demand and time liabilities after a base date. When the average or of the incremental CRR is raised or lowered, bank reserves are absorbed or released, or as a part of H, which is the high powered money, it is not available for deposit creation compared to the base period, and hence H has to be adjusted. The adjusted H increases or decreases as less or more reserves are available for deposit creation.
Scale variable total deposits. The scale variable which affects the reserve ratio in the case of banks would be its net demand and time liabilities, which can be represented by the bank's demand and time deposits. Since the reserve ratio is a proportion of these deposits, an increase in these deposits would have a positive impact on the reserve ratio. Opportunity cost variable interest rates. These represent the cost of holding cash by the banks. Since the banks could have made loans and advances, the interest on these is one such opportunity cost. Similarly, the marginal cost of borrowed funds by the banks can be the bank rate, which the banks have to pay to the RBI, or the call money rate, which is the cost of borrowing from or lending in the call money market. Structural variable. Institutional improvements in the banking system reduce the liquidity requirements of banks and strengthen the banking system through weeding out of weak units. Deposit insurance and nationalization have increased the faith in the banking system. An enlarged interbank call money market and easier access to the RBI for loans also obviates the need to keep ER by banks. Let us now analyze the response of money supply to the currency demand, time deposit, and reserve deposit ratios. The money stock is negatively related to the currency deposit ratio because a rise in C upon DD ratio brings about a shift from deposits to currency, and since deposits undergo multiple expansion while currency does not, the net result is contraction of the money multiplier and of the money stock. Initially, reserve ratio on time deposits were lower than those for demand deposits. Then, an increase in TD upon DD ratio raised the availability of free reserves, and the consequent enlargement of the volume of multiple deposit expansion led to monetary expansion. In the case of narrow money multiplier, an increase in TD upon DD ratio leads to monetary contraction. When TD upon DD ratio rises, the amount of bank reserves required to support time deposits increases. That is, smaller reserves are available to support demand deposits. This implies that the narrow money multiplier falls, leading to narrow money contraction. However, due to increase in the time deposits and increase in the broad money multiplier, there will be an increase in the broad money supply. Enhancement of the reserve ratio or a rise in banks' holding of excess reserves leaves less reserves free to support bank deposits, thereby leading to monetary contraction both in narrow as well as broad money.
There are two additional assumptions we need to relax. One, banks hold excess reserves over and above the amount required as a part of CRR requirements of the RBI. When the banks hold desired excess reserves and do not lend them, then they create no deposits and hence no increase in the money supply takes place. That is, the desired excess reserve in the banking system are an idle component of the reserves are and that are not being used to support any deposits, and therefore such reserves should be subtracted from the reserve money and focus should be on the amount actually supporting the money supply. Secondly, banks can borrow from the Reserve Bank of India in the form of discretionary finance or discount loans. This augments their capacity for deposit creation because the banks do not have to keep any amount aside as a required reserve and can lend the entire amount. This discretionary finance to banks should be added to the stock of reserve money.